Hello, students from Utah. My name is J.C. Eklund, and I'm an undergraduate student here at the University of Iowa State. Um, I am a teacher education candidate in biology, and I'm going to begin by teaching you the first lesson in biodiversity and conservation. So what are the objectives of this lesson? Students should be able to understand the different types of biodiversity and why biodiversity is important. Students will understand how abiotic and biotic factors can change the stability of a population, and students will understand what the meaning of carrying capacity is. What materials my students need? Students simply need a laptop, a pencil/pen, and some paper to write on. You'll be taking some notes. To begin this lesson, I just want to share this little video about ecosystems and coral reefs.
One of the most amazing things about coral reefs is just simply the number of species that live on them. And in fact, if we just take the corals alone, there's over 500 species here on the Great Barrier Reef. If we then look at the fish, we've got about 1,500 different species of fish that live on coral reefs. If you go to the mollusks, the clams, the octopus, there's another 3,000 species. And the list goes on and on. If you include the crabs, the shrimps, the worms, the flatworms, and so on, you get to a very long list indeed. In fact, on the Great Barrier Reef alone, there's probably hundreds of thousands of species. And worldwide, people estimate that coral reefs include over 1 million species. That's an incredible number, because many of those are not known to science.
So there really is a large diversity of species in the Great Barrier Reef. So here I'm going to have you take a few minutes, take about 10 to 15 minutes, and you're going to pause the video. You're going to perform something called a KWL. The first part of a KWL, the K stands for no. So here I'm going to have you write down what you already know about biodiversity and why biodiversity is important. The topic of this KWL seen right here is why is biodiversity important? After you write down what you already know about biodiversity, I'm going to have you write down what you want to know. At the end of this lesson, you'll come back and you'll write down what you learned about biodiversity and why biodiversity is important. So now you can take a moment, pause the video. You can either write down on a piece of paper or you can find an actual KWL online. So what is biodiversity? Here I found a little image that just breaks down the meaning of the word. So the first part of biodiversity is bio. Bio means life and diversity means variety. So you can think of biodiversity as the variety of life. What are the types of biodiversity? So there are 3 types of biodiversity. The first type is genetic diversity. Here you can see a double-stranded helix DNA molecule. Genetic diversity is diversity of genes within a species. Then there is species diversity. This is diversity among species in an ecosystem. So here we have a crocodile and a butterfly, crocodile being one species and butterfly being another species inside the same unit area. The third type of diversity is ecosystem diversity. This is diversity of a habitat in a given unit of area. So different kinds of habitat in a particular area is what that means. On the right side here, we can see an image that shows each one of those types of diversity in one image. So at the top right, we have these yellow fish. This is portraying genetic diversity. We have the same species of these yellow fish, but there's genetic variation in that some of them have different stripes and different amounts of stripes than other fish. Then you can also see here on the left, we have species diversity. So we have jellyfish, this black, white, blue, and yellow larger fish. We have a squid here in the background. We have the yellowfish we previously talked about. We have starfish. We have seahorses, etc. So there's lots of species in this environment, which means that the diversity of species is high. Then here at the bottom it says community/ecosystem diversity. That just means there's different ecosystems and habitats. Different habitats inside of an ecosystem. So we have the sand, we have the rock, we have the reef, etc. I'm also going to have you take another minute, pause this video, and you're going to click on the link provided here in green, and you're going to read about the article is titled Bioscience Topics. So you're going to read about biodiversity. When you're finished reading, go ahead and resume the video. So a little bit further in-depth look at genetic diversity, the first type of diversity we talked about. So what is genetic diversity? It's a variation of all living forms at the genetic level. So in the previous example, we had the fish with the different stripes. Even though they're the same species, genetically they are slightly different. In the top right side, we have people. It looks like some abstract images of different skin tones, different hair tones, etc. So then here in the scenario 1 with the cheetah, we have if a female cheetah mates with multiple males, the variability among the cubs is high. So one female with different males, the cubs could all be genetically different, although they're the same species. You could also think of it as the fish. Say those fish mated with different individuals, so their genes are passed down to have different numbers of stripes. The chance that the cubs will be susceptible to a new pathogen is low. So what does this mean? If they're not susceptible to the pathogen, it means that they have been genetically immune to that pathogen. So if the female cheetah is mating with a cheetah that has a low susceptibility to a pathogen, the cubs and offspring will also have a low susceptibility to a pathogen. In the second scenario, if a female cheetah mates with one male, there's a low variability among the cubs because there was only one genetic variability to be passed down to the cubs from the male cheetah, and the chance that the cubs will be susceptible to a new pathogen is high. Here on the bottom right, genetic diversity is described as the range of genetic material present in the population of a single species. The mountain penguin, seen here in the little image, if you guys can see that, used to have a population of only 10 in 1991. Very, very small population. Luckily, due to conservation efforts, the population is rising. All pink penguins alive today originate from this small group. So they have a small gene pool and a low genetic diversity. So here we can kind of refer back to the cheetah. Female producing with one male will have low genetic variability, so all the cubs will be similar. Same with the situation here with the penguins. Because the penguin only had 10 to begin with, and they've all mated and reproduced from those 10, there's a low genetic diversity. Moving on, I'm going to speak about species diversity. Species diversity is just the different species in a given unit area. So here on the left side, we have this block image of outlines of variable species. So we've got squirrels and antelope and giraffe and monkeys and wolves and rhinoceros, all living in the same given area according to this image. On the right side, we've been given an example of two different communities. In both communities, they have written down the different species as species A, B, C, and D, A, B, C, and D, and then it just gives you the diversity of each species in that ecosystem. So A has a diversity of 25%, so they is 25% of tree A in this ecosystem is of that species of tree. Same with B, C, and D. On the contrary, community 2, species A is much more prevalent, meaning that the diversity is the same. There's still 4 different species, but the population of each has decreased. Ecosystem diversity, here we just have another image. So we've got grassland, we've got water, we have woods in the background, so you have fish living here, you have deer, you have raccoon, you have dragonfly and turtles. So that just shows that there's lots of different places for different species of animals to live inside of the same unit area. I kind of previously mentioned in this slide population. So although the diversity is the same because there's still 4 in each one, A in this one has a higher population percentage than an A in community 1. So what is a population? A population is the number of organisms or species in a given area. So here the number of A is a lot higher than number A in community 1. Like I said, I live in Ames, Iowa, and here in Ames we have a population of 67,154 people. Just a little fun fact. So what factors affect the stability and change of a population? So there's 2 terms. If you remember in the objective statement, I mentioned that there's abiotic and biotic factors. And so what does abiotic and biotic factors mean? Well, abiotic can be thought of as 4 things: atmosphere, sunlight and temperature, wind, water. Those are some examples of abiotic factors that affect a population. Biotic factors that affect a population are animals, plants, fungi, and bacteria. So these mean these factors, abiotic and biotic, play a role on the stability and change of a population. So I'm going to have you watch another little video.
Abiotic and biotic factors. An ecosystem contains living and non-living things. The ecosystem has many examples of the interaction between the living and the non-living. Living things in an ecosystem are called biotic factors. Living things include plants, animals, bacteria, fungi, and more. The non-living parts of the ecosystem are called abiotic factors. Some non-living things are sun, temperature, water, atmospheric gases, and soil. One example of the interaction between abiotic and biotic factors is with plants. Plants use sunlight, water, and CO2 to make food. Without these things, plants would not be able to grow. Another example is the interaction between turtles and soil. Some turtles are known to bury themselves in the soil. When the temperature becomes too hot, turtles seek protection in the cool underground. Elephants and water interact as well. In order to stay hydrated, elephants drink water. In fact, all biotic factors need water to survive. Fish and temperature also show the interaction between the living and the non-living. A fish's body temperature matches its surroundings. Warm tropical waters keep the fish's body operating at an optimal temperature. Another example is fox and the snow. When the temperature drops and the snow starts to fall, some foxes grow a white fur coat. The thick coat insulates and keeps the fox warm. Also, the color matches its surroundings, an adaptation known as camouflage. Lastly, bacteria and soil interact. Bacteria are decomposers. Decomposers get energy by recycling dead organisms back into the ground. Nutrients re-enter the soil, making the ground fertile. So take a look out your window and try and identify the interactions between abiotic and biotic factors.
Alright, so after watching that video, you should have a little bit of a better understanding of how the factors affect stability and change of a population. Animals need water, etc. So like the example of the elephant needing water to survive. If the environment that the elephant lives in doesn't have any water, how can that population be affected? Well, the population would most likely decrease without the availability of water. Here I just have an optional reading. On the bottom left, there is a link to more abiotic factors if you would like to learn more. Okay, so I'm going to have you pause the video. You're going to click on this link, and here's a great example of penguins. It's a story about how population of penguins and carrying capacity. Once you have read this article, it will prove to me that you will understand carrying capacity. So for a closure, we're going to summarize. Biodiversity is the variety of life. That's the meaning of bio and diversity. There are three types of biodiversity: genetic diversity, such as the fish with the stripes; species diversity, such as the different, like elephants and fish and monkeys living in the same environment; and ecosystem diversity, such as the image with the woods as well as the water. You should have an understanding of what it means, what population means. You should have an understanding of what abiotic and biotic factors are, and you should understand how those factors affect the change and stability of a population. And after reading the article from the previous slide, you should also be able to understand what carrying capacity means. So here we're going to end the session, this lesson, on a discussion board. On Canvas, I have added some questions for you to post answers to. The first one we kind of mentioned in the beginning with your KWL is why is biodiversity important? And then the second question is a little bit more thought-provoking. I've given you an example, and I just want you to come up with, based on what you've learned, an answer. The question is, what do you think would happen to an ecosystem if a river was destroyed? So here you can refer back to the video, if you need to, on abiotic and biotic factors and how that affects the stability of a population. Thank you for listening, and I will see you in the next lesson.